Let me show you how to create an interactive business magazine layout using Adobe InDesign. Follow along in this lesson as I'll go over how to create a 3-page layout in this digital magazine project meant for EPub fixed layout viewing. Topics covered in this tutorial include setting up an interactive pop-out sidebar with open and close buttons, creating a hero image slide with meatball icon interactivity, and much more. So let's jump right into this lesson and start creating. Alright, so the first step is creating the new document for our interactive business magazine layout. So let's just click on New File. That'll bring up our new document window here. Let's click on the Web tab up top. And from the presets, we want to choose A4. Now, because I'm going to be demonstrating this on an iPad, a 10.2-inch iPad, I found that this size works well for this tutorial. But of course, you can use a size that you'll be working on for a tablet of your choice or an iPad. So I'm going to choose A4, and you can see the pixel dimensions are in. And for this, let's just make it 3 pages. And the pixel, or the margin, sorry, can stay at 36. And of course, you can click your preview tab to see your work or how the page will look like in real time. Once you're satisfied with the settings that I've shown you here, just click Create. I'm going to click Close because I already have one here. And actually, I'm going to be working on a template that I'll share with you in the description below. You can find this in the download folder when you see all the files there. So we're going to be working off of this template, and I'll show you how to add the content in. And then the latter part of this tutorial will be going over how to add animation and other button interactivity. So let's get started. Now, I'll be working in the CC libraries here. You can see I have a folder with all the content and assets that I'll need for this tutorial. These same assets files will be found in the download folder. I'm going to start on page 1, and you can see I have an image and the masthead for the cover of our magazine. The other content is in the other folders, but you can see I also have some colors here that will work with for this magazine here. I'm going to start with the image, and this is a PSD file. So I want to drag that on, and you can do the same if you're just dragging from a desktop, or you can go to File and place the image. But make sure that when it's loaded in the cursor, not to just drop it in, because then you'll have to resize it that way. You can also just drop it into the template box that I've added here. So I'm just going to do that. Click right in there, and you can see it drops right in nicely. And I also want to show you how to add the masthead and then have the subject in this image kind of have an overlap over the masthead. So let's add the masthead. This is a fictional magazine called Strive. I'm just going to drop that one in because it's the size I want. You can see I've added some guides here previously. I'm just going to slide it right into that position there and then center it to the page. Once you see that magenta line, or you can use your alignment tools up here, make sure that you're aligned to the page, and then align the horizontal centers. Perfect. Now, like I mentioned, I want to have the subject's head in this image overlap the masthead. Now, how do I do this? I'm going to duplicate this image. So I'm going to click on it once and just do Command C or Edit Copy. And then I'm just going to go back to Edit and do Paste in Place. Okay, now you can see it's in the front. And now, because we've duplicated that image, essentially, now it's covering the masthead as well. Here's a little tip in InDesign that if you add PSD files, you can manipulate what you can see and don't see with the layers. Now, I have this image here. I'm going to right-click it, and then I'm going to go down to Object Layer Options. Now, note this will only work with a PSD file. If it's a PNG, there are no layers. So, Object Layer Options. And you can see I have some layers here. There's layer 0 and then main image. I'm just going to turn off layer 0, hit the preview tab here. And you can see, because I've duplicated that image in my layers here, now that first image, the one that we had in the foreground, is now overlapping the text because I turned off the background layer on the PSD. Much like you would in Photoshop, only you have access to that to do that in InDesign as well. So I'm going to click OK, and you can see now we have our image here duplicated, but the one in the front does not have the background, so you can have that cool effect of the subject's head overlapping the masthead. I'm just going to move this down for a sec, because now I'm going to click on this back image, and I'm going to give it this maybe green color that I have in my CC libraries here. And then I'm just going to double click so I can grab the content inside that frame, go to my properties panel, go to opacity, and change the opacity to hard light. So now you can manipulate the color in the background as well. And then you could play with the opacity if you want, but I like it being at 100%. And this just fits the theme of our magazine color scheme as well. I'm gonna go to my layers panel now, and I just wanna make sure that the text frames in this template are brought to the front so we can see them. So I can see one here. I'm gonna just Shift Command right square bracket to move it to the top. You can also just drag these, is fine. There's the second one. We can move that to the front. And then there should be another one here. That's the one where the teaser text will be. So Shift Command and just bring it to the front. Perfect. Now that these are all in place, I can start typing some of the text in here. So this one will be 100, and you can see that the type already carries over because this is a template. Let me show you here in the properties panel. If I go to the text style and the paragraph styles, I've created many here in this template. So just doing a little bit of the work beforehand for you as you're working through this template, especially if you're new to InDesign, this is helpful for you, okay? And so the type that I'm using for this primarily is Degular Display, and I'll leave a link in the description where you can download that if you don't have it, okay? So let's go back here, 100 of the most influential leaders. Okay, now I want this to maybe go something like this over 4 lines, and I want the word influential to be maybe this brighter green to emphasize that word. Now you notice that the subject, the clothing and the background in this image is starting to become a little bit too busy against the text, so the text may be hard to read at times. One thing I typically do, and I'll show you how to do now, is how to create a gradient feather just to soften that area so the text is more legible. So I'm going to grab the rectangle frame tool, and I'm going to draw out a frame just about halfway of the page, and then just go edge to edge. Let's give this a black fill. And then in the properties panel, go ahead and click the effects icon and choose gradient feather. I have my preview selection on, and then let's just make this 90 degrees. So you can just type it in, it's probably easier. And you can see that the area below, you have a nice fade effect with the gradient feather. You can also adjust the feather stops and then the mid slider here if you want the gradient feather to be stronger or lighter. I think something like that is fine, and then just click OK. And then I just send this backwards, so Shift Command, or just Command and then just send it backwards till you have it just in front of the subject, okay? And you can see that now the text becomes a little bit easier to read. I also add a multiply effect to that gradient feather. So I go to opacity and just do a multiply, and then I just tone that down a bit. Something like that is fine. Actually, I don't even think you have to do multiply in this case. So I think normal is fine. Just tone down the opacity. Something like 85 is fine, just so the dark areas aren't dark where it's blocking out the image completely. I think that works there. Now in this text frame down below, I'll just add a little bit more detail to support our main headline teaser here. So Taverna, of course, this is all fictional. Taverna Technology CEO Jessica Elliott tops the list of, you could say, leaders again if you want. Okay, so, and of course let's move Jessica's, so this is what's called a bad break here, where you have Jessica on one line and Elliot on the other. So just put your cursor before Jessica and do a soft return, so Shift and then return. Okay, and now I can get rid of, we could just say tops the list is fine. And then up here, just above our masthead, let's just call this Business Magazine. And then of course, if you're going to add more teasers to this, a good area would be to the left, but we're keeping this one pretty straightforward. So let's move on now to the second page where I'll show you how to add an interactive sidebar, which can be opened and closed with interactive buttons. We'll do that next. I'm going to make my way back to the Pages panel, double click page 2, and you can see all the frames are in this template as well. I'm going to click on the CC libraries, and you can see I have page 2 collapsed in my CC library content here. And so there's the main image. I'm just going to drag and drop it right into that frame there for the main image. Again, let's just send that to the back. Okay. And I have the main headline here, and this is called E-commerce tips to fuel business. And this is a story or an article about e-commerce tips to fuel small businesses. Now, again, I'm just going to select the bottom half of that headline and give it that light green color that I created in my assets here. Again, you can see it's hard to read, so let's create another gradient feather. Let's go ahead and just create another frame like so. And let's give this a dark color again. So black is fine. And go to my properties panel, click effects, and then choose gradient feather. Again, this will be a gradient going from the bottom to the top, so 90 degrees works. Now it's finicky, unless you just type it in, is fine. Just click OK, and let's move that backwards. You can see now the type is a lot easier to read. Now, before I go any further, you can see I have guides set up on this page, actually throughout the entire template. So you won't have to worry about setting them up, but I want to show you how. And it's important for this lesson because we'll need them when we're setting up the interactive sidebar to come in from side to side when we open and close it. So quickly, I'm just going to go back to my Pages panel, double click the A parent, and you can see I set up all my guides on the parent pages so they take effect throughout the entire document. So in this case, I would just go up to Layout and Create Guides. And for this tutorial, I have the columns set to 3 and the gutter set to 18. And the guides would be fit to margin and not the page. You could see here, the guides are fit to the margin in this layout and not the page. Now, if I wanted to remove these existing guides, I would just click this selection here. That would remove the old guides and set up the new ones for you. I've already set up these ones, but I wanted to show you how these guides are set up. So 3 columns with an 18 pixel gutter, okay? I'm gonna hit cancel and go back to page 2. I'm gonna click on this text frame and that will become our deck headline. And I have some text here. I'm just gonna paste it in. And you can see, because this is a template, it already formats for you. So 3 ways how your small business can move from surviving to thriving. I also have some text here for the body text. I'm just going to copy and I'll just paste that right in. And let's Command A to select all. Go to your paragraph styles and let's choose body copy or body text. And in this body, I want to convert these subheaders here to a format or a style that I've actually called subhead. So select them and choose subhead. There's a few of them here, so let's go ahead and do that. There's one more here, create ways for customers to make digital payments, and subhead. All right, so we'll leave that as is. We want this text frame to be hanging over the page because we're gonna add a scrolling frame to it. We'll just leave that as is for now. And let's focus our attention to the interactive sidebar now, okay? I'm gonna make my way back to the CC libraries and I'm gonna click on the by the numbers sidebar here and just drag it onto the page and just drop it in. Now I want the right side of it to snap to the left side of the page. So when we open it, the sidebar will appear, and then when we close it, it'll go back into position outside of the page. So that is exactly where we want to position this. I also have a pair of buttons here. One is a hamburger icon for open, and the other is an X for close. So I'm just gonna bring those onto the page as well. And when you place these, we just want to stack them. I'm going to zoom in here, and let's place it just right around here is fine. You can notice that the color of the button is the same color as the background. You want to make sure that it's not here, because then when you open it, the button will interfere with the by the numbers headline or the top title. So place it just above, even if the bottom of it is touching or aligned with the margin, that's fine. Okay, let's move the close button so it's aligned as well. Now because these will be stacked, that's fine. I just want to make sure that the close is below the open. So you can do that in the layers panel. I've already renamed these, or you can rename them when you place them. One will be called open, so that's the hamburger icon, and the close is the X, okay? You can see they're stacked on one another, okay? Now, remember, we added some guides to this page through the parent page. I'm gonna click on this infographic sidebar, and also let's make sure that that is at the actually that's exactly where we want it, perfect. So I'm gonna position it, and I'm going to hold my shift key while I'm dragging it onto the page, and you can see it aligns nicely with that first column, and the edge is still on the left side of the page, so that's good. I'm gonna grab a guide, so on the left hand side, just drag a guide and place it right in the middle of the infographic, okay? The sidebar. Perfect, now let's go ahead and move this right back to the right. Reason being, we want to add some motion path, a custom motion path animation from the center point of the infographic sidebar, where it's positioned right now, to that line that we created, because that's the center point of where the animation will land, okay? So let's do that next. I'm gonna click on the line tool, and while holding my shift key, I'm simply just going to draw a line. And right now, I just want it to go to that far right, the far right guide, okay? We'll maneuver that once we set up the motion path. Now that line is still selected, so I'm just gonna click on my selection tool and hold my command key or control on Windows and click on the grouped. By the way, this is all grouped. Click anywhere to select that as well. And you can see, oh, did I lose my line there? Okay, let's hold shift and click that. So now we have the infographic and the line selected. Let's open our animation panel. I'll just drag that, maybe move it there. And by the way, animation, you can find that in Window, Interactive Animation. Now for this, because we have the infographic and the line selected, it's not a motion path yet. We're going to convert it to one by clicking this icon here, convert to motion path. Okay. Now, by the way, again, the motion path will go in the order that you drew out that line. So we went left to right. That's the way the animation will go. If you go right to left, that's the way the animation will go. So just be sure that when you're drawing that line, go left to right. Okay. You can see right now it's a custom preset, and the animation is called by the numbers. That's fine. It's the name of what the asset is called. The duration, I want this to be very quick, so 0.25. And you want to make sure that the opacity is set to none. We don't want to fade in. We want a smooth slide in and out, okay? Right now it's on page load. We'll change that once we set the button interactivity. But if I go ahead and play this, you can see it comes in. You see how it went too far? That's because we have to set the motion path. So let's click on that green line, which is now motion path, and just drag the right side of it to that guide that we created. Now if I press play, you can see it snaps right to that center point, okay? So that's happening on page load. We'll set that to turn off once we set up the interactivity. So if I zoom in here to these buttons, let's move in and focus on these buttons now. And you may need the layers panel just to grab the one that's in the back. Right now I'm on open. Again, I'm just going to drag the buttons and forms panel over to this window as well. Window, interactive, buttons and forms is where you can find that. So I'm clicked on the hamburger icon and I'm going to convert that into a button. And I'm going to call this open sidebar icon. Okay, pretty simple. And the action here is animation. So we're controlling an animation. Perfect. And you can see the only animation we've set up so far is by the numbers. So that's good. Select that. And the option here is to play. So when I click that open hamburger icon, it's going to play the animation. Perfect. Now let's go to the layers panel again and just hide open sidebar so we can access the close menu button. Perfect. Now let's go to buttons and forms and let's choose button and let's call this close sidebar button. Again, this will be an action of animation and the option instead of play will be to reverse. Okay. So in other words, we're closing that sidebar and reversing the animation. The only other thing I have to do to this close button here is I want to hide it until it's triggered. And I'll show you why in just a sec. So let's go back to the layers panel. And I'm going to turn open on again. And let's just, again, I'll just play this so you could see what's happening. So there's the by the numbers. And right now, all we can do is just open it, right? And I'll show you the next step here. So open sidebar icon, let's go back to that. You can just simply click it, go back to buttons and forms, and let's add a secondary action to this of show hide buttons and forms. Now, when I click that icon, the hamburger icon, I want it to go away and have the close button appear. So you can do that with show hide buttons and forms. I'm going to hide the open sidebar icon and I'm going to show the close sidebar button. The reason I had the close hidden until triggered is because I want to have it triggered when I open it. Okay. We're going to have to do the same thing to the close sidebar button. So I'm going to hide that, select close, go back to buttons and forms, and add a secondary action of show hide buttons and forms. Only in this case, we're reversing it. Instead of showing or hiding the open bar, sidebar icon, we're gonna show it, and then we're gonna hide the close sidebar button, okay? So let's test that out. I'm gonna go back to layers and turn open back on. And one other thing I have to do is click on the sidebar by the numbers graphic here, go to animation, and you can see right now it has two events. It's gonna open on page load, which we don't want it to do, and there's also on a button event, which we've set through those open and close buttons. So let's just uncheck on page load because we don't want that to appear when the page loads. Now that has been set up, I'm going to click the preview button here. You can see there's the open, the icon there for the hamburger icon. I'm going to click it and you can see it disappears, and now I have the X button to close. For this next step, we'll be using the scrolling frame tool built into In5. So for In5, you'll need to download that extension, which I'll add that link in the description below. Once you download it, you'll have access to the scrolling frame panel. So what I want to do first is go ahead and group the deck, headline, and the body copy frame. Command G, or you can go up to Object and Group. And now that I have that set, I'm going to create what will become a container frame. And again, you'll just use the rectangle frame tool. Now I want this container frame to be even above the main headline and the photo there. And I want the bottom of this container to be snapped to the bottom margin, okay? And let me just go to my layers panel and make sure that that is actually behind everything. And just to, let's call this container, just so we know what it is. in the layers panel. I'm just gonna lock that for a sec and go back to my selection tool and select the grouped deck headline and the body text here. And I'm just gonna cut that. So Command X or Edit, Cut, and then click on the container, unlock it, and then click on it once, right click and paste into. Now it pastes identically where you cut it from. And before you go any further in this, just make sure that the bottom here has a clean break. You can see I've set it up so it ends nicely here in that sentence. You don't want it to be like this. So when the viewer opens it up, half the text is cut off. So try your best to find a clean break, even if that means going in and maneuvering some of the text, bringing up some of the paragraphs, kind of edit it that way. It looks a lot better when there's a clean break rather than when some of the text is cut off. So I'm just gonna Command Z, and so that looks good. Perfect. Now what I want to do is set up a scrolling frame on here. So I'm gonna click on that container again, go up to the you can go up to the In5 drop down, which will show up once you download the extension, interactive widgets, and then it would be, where would it be? Scrolling frame. So it's in the basic drop down here. But once you install the scrolling frame, it'll also show up in your window, and then just go down to the bottom, universal scrolling frame. So I'm gonna click that, bring it off to the side, and then the scroll direction will be vertical. And then the scroll indicators, you can hide them or show them. I prefer in this case to hide them. And let's see how that looks. I'm going to click on any of my interactive panels and click the EPub preview window. And let's see how that looks when I scroll. That works nicely. So I can scroll and you can see it's hiding behind, and then I can scroll back to its position. So if I want the viewer to read more, they can read more, and it goes back to its original position. So we've added the scrolling frame, we've added the interactivity to the sidebar with open and close button functionality. Let's move on to the third page and I'll show you how to add a photo slide with interactive buttons. I'm going to make my way up to the pages panel and double click page 3. And once again, you can see all the frames are on the page in this template. So let's go to the CC libraries. In my case, you'll have to pull the assets from the download folder. So you can see I have 3 images here. Now the top image here will be a set of 3. Again, they'll be stacked on one another, and we'll use the object states to create a multi-state object to scroll through each one. So in this case, I actually want to create 2 more copies of this image, and I'm going to click on the first image and drop it into the first frame. The second image into this one here, and you could just use the pasteboard for now to add the images. And I'm going to click the third one and just drop it right into that third frame. Now in my layers panel, you can see I've already gone ahead and renamed these slide 1, slide 2, slide 3 in this hero image slide that we'll add interactivity to. So we want to make sure that slide 1 is at the top, followed by slide 2, and there's slide 3. So I'm just going to position them right at the top, and you can see when I do that, they fall in order because we've placed them that way in the layers panel. Perfect. So if I turn that off, you can see that they're all there. Next thing I want to do is just select all these, the 3 of them. I can close this scrolling frames panel because we don't need that anymore. So I'm just going to select all 3 of these and open my object states panel. I'm just going to add that to this here. And the object states will be adding a multi-state object. So in order to do that, make sure that you have all 3 selected, and then just create or convert those selections into a multi-state object. And you can see there's state 1, state 2, and state 3. Perfect. And you can actually go ahead and rename these. So let's call this one photo slide 1. That's much easier than leaving them as state 2, state 3, because even though we rename them in the layers panel, that won't carry over to the object states. So let's go here to state 2 and let's rename this photo slide 2. And the third one is photo slide 3. Perfect. Now I have some buttons that I'll add here to this and some information as well that will have animate from the right side of the page. So we can go ahead and add the buttons first. So this will simply be 3 sets of ellipse shapes. So we'll use the ellipse tool for this. So just hold the rectangle frame tool until the flyout comes, and then choose the ellipse frame tool. And I'm going to zoom in here, and basically what we'll be creating here is a meatball interactive button user experience, so that when we click those little icons, one will highlight to correspond with the image it's showing. So I'm just going to hold my shift key and draw out something like that is fine. And so let's make this one this green color. And again, I'll just make 3 of those. I'm gonna select all 3, make sure they're aligned as well. Oh, that's aligned to the page. Aligned to selection. Just make sure they're aligned vertically and horizontally, I should say. And distributed evenly as well. So let's do that. Perfect, they are. I'm gonna make another set of these. Just drag out another copy. And in this case, let's just make them maybe black at 5% tint, something like that is fine. Okay, so I have a white version, and then when the user clicks on one, the green one will appear. But here's the trick. You want to kind of fool InDesign here, and these ones actually won't be buttons. They will be they'll be converted to buttons, but they won't be clickable, and you'll see what I mean in just a sec. So let's go ahead now and rename these so they're not all circle, circle, circle. It'll be a lot easier. So let's click this first green one, and let's call this green button 1. Okay, this one will be green button 2. Okay, and I'll move that right under green button 1. Let's click this one here, and this will be green button 3. Okay, let's move that one right below. Let's click this first white one here, and this will be white button 1, followed by white button 2, and this last one, of course, is white button 3, and we'll reorder these. White button 3, let's reorder them. So 2 goes under 1, 3 goes under 2, and I actually want all of these to be above the white. Okay, so now what I can do is just move these like so that the green is sitting on top of the white. All right, makes sense so far? Just 6 circles that are stacked up on one another. I want to lock this multi-state object, which I should rename before I do that. We don't want to just call it multi-state 4. Let's call it EV photo slide. Okay, you can call this whatever you want, but renaming that object name is super important when we're setting up the button interactivity. So now I'm still selected to this. I just want to lock it for now. And what I want to do is grab maybe the rectangle frame tool, and I want to add just a frame that goes over. Before I do that, I want to space these out just a little bit more. Okay, let's move this one to about here, and then that one to there. Okay, just so we have some nice separation there, and then we can move the center right to there. How does that look? Let me just zoom out, or maybe move them in just a little bit more. Something like that is fine. Perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and now center these. Beautiful. All right, I did that because I just want to add a little bit more space when we're adding these trigger frames here. Okay, so this frame that we're creating here will just be an empty box that will become the actual trigger to show hide these meatball icons here. Okay, so let's click that, and right now it's just called rectangle. So let's go in here. Actually, let's go to the buttons and forms and convert that to a button. And let's call this trigger 1, okay? That's the trigger 1 button. And I want to create another one. Instead of doing that, let's just copy it and paste it or drag another version of it. And you can see it automatically converts to trigger 2. And let's do the same thing. Move it here. There's trigger 3, okay? Perfect, so I have all of these. Let me just make sure that those are aligned as well. They are. And now I can start adding the interactivity to this, okay? I'm just gonna lock these trigger buttons for now. We'll get back to those in just a sec. I wanna make sure that these are all buttons too. So let's just click, let's start with white button 1, okay? Go to buttons and forms and call this white button 1. And there is no action for these, okay? It's just, we want to convert them to buttons so we can show and hide them. Okay, so I'm toggling between the buttons and forms and layers for now. And this is white button 2. Back to layers. Click the white button 3. And this is button. This will be white button 3. Okay, perfect. So let's click the first green one here, button. And this is green button 1. And just to save some time, I'm just going to drag 2 more versions of this one. You can see it's green button 2 now, and there's green button 3, okay? I just wanna make sure in my layers panel that they're still in order. Green button 1, yeah, I guess it doesn't matter, they're still on top, but it's just to make it easier visually to see how that looks. Same thing with this, even though they're all in front, I just want to make sure that they're visually in order. So when I'm working, it just makes it a little bit easier. All right, I'm going to go back to my layers panel and unlock the trigger buttons because now we're going to add the interactivity to them. So all the interactivity will be added to those trigger buttons and not these other green and white buttons. Those are just simply to show and hide them. So let's start with trigger 1. You can see it's there. I'm going to go back to my buttons and forms, go to actions and show hide buttons and forms. Now the trigger buttons, you could just ignore those. So if it's an X, just ignore it, that's fine. The white buttons here, we want to, first off, we want to show the green button. So just know that when we click the trigger, we want to show the green button that it's triggering, and then make sure that it's hiding the other 2. And in this case, we want the white button to be hidden and the other 2 buttons, the white buttons, to be shown as well. I'm going to click on the second trigger here, go back to my layers panel, trigger 2, go to buttons. Again, it's already set up as a button. The action here is also show hide buttons and forms, and make sure that the trigger buttons are ignored. In the green button selection, make sure that 2 is shown, and you can go ahead and hide the other 2 green buttons. And the white button will be shown on white button 1, and it'll be shown on white button 2 and hidden on white button 1, or white button 2, I should say. This can get a little confusing, so just make sure that you're processing it, just kind of taking your time to make sure that it's all making sense. It's easy to make a mistake, and that's why using the EPub preview is a good idea as well. Let's click that third trigger here. Action in this case will be show hide buttons and forms. And again, starting with the green buttons because it's easier that way to visualize it, we want that green button, the third one, to show. You can go ahead and hide the other 2. And in this case, we want to show the white button 1, show the white button 2, and hide the white button 3. So let's go ahead and test that out and see how it looks. You can see right now that all 3 green buttons are showing. We'll fix that in a sec, but I'll click the first one. You can see the other 2 are white. I'll click the second one, and the other 2 are white. And you can see you can go through them, and they've been set up using the show hide buttons and forms system. Now the only thing we want to do here is go to the layers panel. Let's click on green button 2, go back to buttons, and let's hide that until it's triggered, and do the same thing for the third green button as well. Buttons and forms, hide until triggered. And let's see it now. And you can see that those two start off as white, and now you can scroll through them and it's set up using the show hide buttons and forms. Beautiful. Now we want it to control a secondary action here, the trigger buttons, okay? The secondary action will be go to state. So I'm going to click that, and you can see here the state, the only multi-state that we've set up is the EV photo slide. And you can see that it automatically defaults to photo slide 1. So that first button will trigger the first photo in that photo slide. I'm going to click the second trigger, go to the action, and let's choose go to state. And in this case, it'll be photo slide 2. You can see it automatically sets that up as well. I'm going to click that third one here and choose go to state. And here is the photo slide. Let's choose photo slide 3. And you can see those are all set up as well. So now when I test that out, you'll see that not only does it maneuver these buttons, but it slides to the next picture or goes to the next picture. Okay. Now, one other thing I want to add here is another animation. So a third action to this button to have more information fly in from the right when we click it. So let's go ahead and do that part next. So I have some nuggets of information that I want to have appear when I click these buttons as well. I'm just going to zoom out here and let's bring in those facts that will contain in a circle that will fly in from the right. So first off, let's just grab a ellipse frame tool and let's draw out a circle that we like, the size, and let's just make it that color for now. I'm gonna put my guides on and I want it to be the size, the width of one of these columns. So it's a nice large circle there. Now, what I want to do actually is convert this shape to, or convert it to a text frame instead. So just go up to Object, Content, and let's change it from a graphic to text. Now I have some text that I'm going to bring in and just place right in. I'm going to paste it in actually. So I'm going to copy it and just Command V. And what I want to do is go into my text frame options. And to do that, just hold your Option key down and double click. And you can see here, we can add an inset to this. So let's go ahead and add, let me click my preview here. And let's go to about 14 is good. And let's center that, center align it, I should say. And click OK. Now I have some text in my paragraph styles here that I've converted. Let's see what I've called this. Bubble text 18 point. So that's good. And so that is, again, Degular display 18 point, but I want the 10 million to be not medium, but black, okay? Just to kind of emphasize that figure, maybe black. Well, let's make it bold, okay? And let's make that the darker green color as well. Perfect. So what I'm gonna do is just create 2 more copies of this here. Again, I'm just holding my Option key and dragging another copy of it instead of redoing that process. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in. Now I'm going to have to reformat this. So I'm going to hold my Option key and do basic paragraph and then go to the bubble text. And this will be 121K plus, will be bold. And let's make it that green color as well. Okay. We have one more to do here. Just going to copy and paste that last one in. Again, let's go ahead and strip the formatting. So hold your Option key and do basic paragraph and then make it the bubble text 18 point. And we just want to emphasize that last one. So I'm just going to make it bold here. And of course, make it that dark green color. Perfect. Now I want to rename these and we can do that actually. Let's do it in the layers panel first, perhaps. Let's see here. We want to make sure that these are all in order. So 10 million, that's got to be at the top. And let's call this bubble, info bubble 1 maybe. Info bubble 1. This is called info bubble 2. So let's go ahead and make this info bubble 3. Perfect. And I want to make sure again that they're stacked one another, on top of one another, I should say. Perfect. Now it's time to add the animation to all three of these. So I am going to convert these to a multi-state object. Just select them and go to the Object States panel and choose the Convert Selection to Multi-State Object. You can see there's three of them there. And again, we reordered them the way we wanted. So we have state 1, 2, and 3. Again, let's go ahead and rename this to Bubble 1, Bubble 2, and Bubble 3. And just call the multi-state object name, let's call it info bubbles is fine, okay? Let's click on bubble 1. And actually what I'm gonna do is create another guide off the page here. Something like that is fine. Because when we animate these, we want them to travel at a far distance outside of the page, giving it time for the image to appear, and then we want the bubble to appear after that. So that's why I'm setting this guide out of the page onto the pasteboard so we can extend that motion path as well. So going back to the object states, click on bubble 1, which I have here. Let me move it here, is fine. Click on bubble 1, then double click to drive into that specific bubble here. Go to the animation, choose preset, and we want this to fly in from the right. Okay, now we just want to extend that motion path to the guide we set. Now it's important to set that guide so you can set all three of them and they're coming in from the exact same spot, okay? Perfect, so we want it to fly in from the right. Let's click that again. Go to object states and double click. Animation. Okay, so on state load, we'll figure that out when we click the trigger. We'll set it up to happen that way. Let's set this to 0.25 is fine. And just make sure that there's no fade in. We just want a nice smooth transition as well. Perfect. Let's go ahead and do the next one. So let's go to the Object States panel, click Bubble 2, double click to drive into that selection. Go to Animation, and we want Fly In from right, and we'll extend that motion path. Let's click that. Let's extend that motion path so it goes all the way to that guide that we set up. Oops. Let's make sure we're doing that correctly. And click Object States. Sometimes it can be tricky, but double click and then click the motion path, and let's drag that all the way to the right. Perfect. And we have one more to do here. Actually, let's make sure that we have that set up the way we want. Double click, animation, and again, state load is, sorry, the duration should be 2.25. And just make sure that there's no fade in. Perfect. Let's go back to Object States, click Bubble 3, double click to drive into it. Go to Animation and choose Fly In from right. Set the state load to 0.25 seconds and no fade in. And let's just make sure that we're bringing that motion path to that guide we set up. Okay. Now all of them should be set up the way we want. One other important step is making sure that these are hidden until they're animated or they're triggered through the buttons that we'll set up. So let's go back to Bubble 1 and double click, go to Animation and Hide Until Animated. Do the same for the other two by double clicking, Animation, Hide Until Animated. Bubble 3, double click, go back to Animation, and just make sure that's hidden until animated. Great. Now I can go back to my layers panel and let's start adding the interactivity to these triggers to also have these come in when we click them. So let's go back to trigger 1, go to buttons and forms, And let's add a third action to this first button of animation, okay? And this will be info bubbles 1. You can see that there's 3 there. So info bubbles, bubble 1 is what we want. Click that second trigger, action, animation. And you can see info bubbles, let's make it 2. And for it to play is fine. And then let's click the third one, action, and then animation. And this one will be bubbles 3. Perfect. Let's test these out and see how it looks now. So I'm just going to click on my object states and click the EPub preview. The first one comes in. We'll just make sure that that's hidden as well. And you can see I can click the next one, the third one, and they all come in as well. The only other thing I want to do to these bubbles is add an opacity to kind of see through them. But you can see, and they're also a little bit too fast. So what I'm going to do is just set them up to come in at half a second and see how that looks. So I went ahead and added an opacity to this. You could see a 90% opacity. You could see through the bubbles just a little bit. And if I double click this and go to animation, I've increased the time from 0.25 to 0.5. So let's see how that looks now. That first one will come in on page load, which is fine, but then the others will appear when we click through. And you can see that the image comes in before and then the bubbles appear after, which is a good timing for the animation as well. So let's move on and add the rest of the content to this page. We'll add a story and then another menu down here to trigger more content down below. All right, let's add the content for this last part here. Let's start with the headline first. This will say the future of, and then there's a secondary text frame in this template, and this will just be electric. You can see there's some nice contrast between the two greens there. This is the deck headline, which I have here, and I'll just paste it right in. I'm just going to highlight electric vehicle, and let's make that maybe semi-bold just to kind of emphasize it a little bit more and make it that middle green. Actually, let's make it the lighter green is fine. Perfect. Now you can see I have a text frame here, and I'll add the first piece of information. There'll be 3 of them all together. The first one will be save money. I'm just going to highlight that or select all, go to my properties panel and change that to body text. Put your cursor in the very first line of text there. And this is the subhead. So let's do that. Perfect. I'm going to make 2 other copies of this like so. And let's just delete the body text portion of it. And I have the other text here, so this will be the second piece. I'm going to paste this subhead here. I'm going to paste the third piece in here and then the last subhead. Great, now all our info pieces are set up. I just want to make sure that they're named and ordered correctly. So again, I'm just going to tear off the layers panel here and let's make sure that they're all set up the way we want. So let's call this first one info. How about EV info 1? Click that second one. And this is EV info 2. Click that third one. And let's call it EV info 3. Now we're going to make sure that these are all stacked because we're going to turn them into or convert them into a multi-state object as well. So I'm just going to grab the second one and place it there. And I already know that it's behind the first. And same with the third. Let's just drag it and stack it right behind the other 2. So if I turn them off, you can see they're in the order that we've placed them here. Now I'm going to select all 3. You can see that I have them selected in my layers panel. And again, in my object states, I'll just bring that back over. We're going to convert this into a multi-state object. Now these are just text boxes or text frames that are stacked on one another, but the states are there as well. So let's go ahead and rename this to same thing, EV info 1. and then EV info 2, and lastly, EV info 3. And the multi-state object name is EV info text. How about that? That's just easier to find when we set up the buttons, which we'll do next. I'm going to go back to my CC libraries. You can see I have 3 icons here that will correspond with each text element in my object state in this multi-state object. I'm going to shift over to the left and we'll start bringing these in. I'm going to click on EV info 1 and the corresponding icon will be this money icon to save money. And the second one will be sustainable. So just this green leaf icon is fine. And the last one is flexible charging. So that will be this charge station icon. I'm going to select all 3 and make sure that the centers are aligned and also they're distributed as well. And I'm just going to position these about halfway. Something like that is fine. Now I want to also create secondary icons here. And because these are vector and I've just copied them over to InDesign, what I can do is just create another color for them. This will be useful when we're setting up the show hide buttons and forms and setting up the interactivity to our text elements in this design here. I'm going to click on the first icon here and let's convert that into a button, and this will be called cost button. The action here will be go to state, and the object we'll have to change to EV info text, and the state is EV info 1. Let's click on the second one, convert that to a button. Let's call this one sustainable button. And the action here is go to state, and we'll change the object to info text, and the state is EV info 2. Let's click on that third one, and this will be button, and let's call this charge button, and the action is go to state, and we want EV info text with EV info 3. Okay, now that those have been set up, let's convert these ones into buttons as well. So just convert it into a button, all 3, but let's rename this one cost underscore blank button. And the second one, we'll change that or convert it into a button. That will be sustainable blank button. So it's just a blank button that we'll use to kind of trigger through, much like we did with the meatball icons in the second part, page 2. Let's click that third one, the charge, convert that to a button, and this will be called charge underscore blank button. And there is no action, so that's good. And let's just make sure that if we go into our layers panel here, that these are above. Good. So this one is above the cost button. This one is above the sustainable button, and the charge. Did we not? We have to rename this. So this will be called charge button. Maybe I missed that. Perfect. So if I go to my layers panel, we just gotta make that blank underscore blank button. Perfect. So let's add a second action now to these right side icons. I'm going to click the first one and go to actions and show hide buttons and forms. Now there's many buttons here. We don't have to worry about the top half. We only have to worry about the ones that are called blank. So in this case, we want to show the cost blank button and then hide the other two blank buttons. So hide the other blank button and hide the sustainable blank button. Let's click on the second icon here and show hide buttons and forms. And in this case, we want to hide the cost blank button, show the sustainable blank button, and hide the charge blank button. Let's click the charge icon, that's the last one, add a secondary action of show hide buttons and forms, and this will be hide for the cost blank button, hide for the blank sustainable blank button, and show the charge blank button. So these two darker icons here, the sustainable and the charge, let's just make sure that those are hidden until triggered as well. I'm going to click the second one, the charge, make sure that's hidden until triggered. Now I can zoom in and just make sure that these are aligned on top of one another. Something like that is fine. And just make sure that this one is aligned as well. And then the bottom one, just drag the charge, the darker one, on top and make sure that that is aligned as well. Perfect. Now let's test this out and see how it looks. Just click on the EPub preview window again, and you can see that the first one appears. I'll click the second, and that one highlights, and then the third one highlights. And as I'm doing that, the text component or the text elements on this page are also corresponding or syncing with each icon that we set up. So that was a combination, again, of the show hide buttons and forms, as well as the multi-state object we set up with the text frames to the right. So as a final step, I'll show you how to export this as an EPub fixed layout and view it on an iPad. To export this, let's go up to File and Export. I'm going to choose the folder, and we want to make sure that the format is set to EPub fixed layout. Go ahead and click Save. The EPub fixed layout export options window will appear. Let's choose all pages. You can explore some of the other settings. I'm just going to click OK. I'm going to open it on my iPad now and show you how it looks on that device. Alright, I've gone ahead and opened the EPub fixed layout project on an iPad. Let's go through it. So here's the front cover with the PSD image that we had overlap over the masthead. Let's go to page 2. Here's the scrolling frame that goes behind the main image and headline. Here's the interactive sidebar that we set up open and close button functions to. And here's the third page with the meatball icon interactivity to scroll through a photo slide that also reveals an animation with an info bubble that appears. And finally, we set up another multi-state object to click through these icons that bring more information on each piece that corresponds with the icon. I really hope you enjoyed this in-depth tutorial on how to create an interactive business magazine layout using Adobe InDesign. If you found it helpful, leave a like or comment below, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified when new tutorials are uploaded. If you'd like to learn more about digital publishing and interactive design using Adobe InDesign, check out this playlist right up here. Until next time, take care and keep creating.